parsha, the Torah portion, with Rabbi Sacks's essay on one of the verses in the Torah portion. Of course, the Torah portion itself, it talks about many, many different things, mainly to do with the tabernacle and the clothing that the priests would wear when they did the service in the tabernacle, and the clothing that the high priest wore when he did the service in the tabernacle. And ultimately, the tabernacle came to an end, and they did end up building an actual temple in Jerusalem, and the same clothing that they wore while they did the service in the tabernacle, which was mainly used in the desert, and then afterwards it was built in Shiloh, and then Nov and Givon were were used as sort of like temporary locations, and then the permanent location became the Beis Hamikdash, which we know as where is the western wall. That is the wall around the mountain where the Beis Hamikdash was. So, of course, we don't have the Beis Hamikdash today. It was destroyed by the Romans, but we hope that the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt, and the Kohanim, the priests, will again wear these clothing, these special garments that they wore when they did the service. Now, in the Torah portion, it also talks about the inauguration of the tabernacle and all the details of the sacrifices that they brought. It was inaugurated for 7 days. And then on the 8th day was like the first day that it was really the real deal. So for 7 days it was inaugurated. That was the 23rd of Adar. The month that we're in is Adar. And this year we actually have 2 Adars because it's a leap year. And but the month that when the tabernacle was inaugurated, it was during the month of Adar on the 23rd day. And then for 7 days, which means through the 29th day, it was being inaugurated. Each day it was put up, they brought sacrifices, they took it down, then they put it up the next day. And finally, on the 8th day, which is the first day of the month of Nisan, that's the month of Passover, that's when they actually had it start the real deal on the first day. And actually, we read about all the donations that were given by the leaders of each tribe gave donations, and each day became a special day for each of the tribes on from that first day of Nisan all the way for 12 days afterwards. It was like each tribe had their day that they gave their donation and sacrifice. Now, the Mishkan, we know, was used throughout the time in the desert. So it means it was used for approximately 39 years. And then it was established in Shiloh as a more of a semi-permanent location. And it lasted there for a few hundred years. But then it was destroyed by the Plishtim there. And even Shiloh was not the real permanence. The Beis Hamikdash, the real permanence was in the Beis Hamikdash, which the Beis Hamikdash lasted for 410 years. And then the Babylonians destroyed it. And then it was rebuilt. And it lasted 420 years. And then it was destroyed in the year 70. So that's how you come to today. We're now 1950 years after it was destroyed the second time as a Beis Hamikdash. It had been destroyed earlier as a Mishkan, as a tabernacle. It was destroyed in Shiloh, but as a Beis Hamikdash, it was destroyed twice. As a temple, as a permanent temple, it was destroyed twice, both on the same day, the day of Tisha B'Av. So the Torah portion mentions a verse that Rabbi Sacks is going to discuss. And the verse is talking about the sacrifice that was a daily sacrifice. After the Torah talks about the inaugural sacrifices, the Torah mentions that those are besides the daily sacrifice. And when it talks about the daily sacrifice, it says, you shall bring 1 lamb in the morning and 1 lamb in the afternoon as a daily sacrifice. And that is the verse that Rabbi Sacks is going to talk about. Now, that verse, it's repeated a few times in the Torah because it's mentioned at different locations. One of them is where it meant it's actually recited on a daily basis. We read it in the morning because our morning prayer is in place of that sacrifice. And the same thing as our afternoon prayer is in place of the afternoon sacrifice. So in the time of the temple, they actually brought the sacrifice. Nowadays, we do a prayer called the Shacharis prayer and the Mincha prayer. Both of those prayers are in place of the sacrifices that were brought on a daily basis. It was called the Karban Tamid, the daily sacrifice, the usual sacrifice. It was the sacrifice that was done daily, and it was done twice a day. It was a morning and an afternoon sacrifice. And the truth is, even in the Ma'ariv service, even the night service, the night service corresponds to the fats that were not burned during the day. They're burnt at night. So even the night prayer, Ma'ariv, which is the prayer that we recite at night, that is in place of these two sacrifices. So Rabbi Sacks wants to talk about the idea of routine. That's really what this article is about, routine. And Rabbi Sacks starts his essay with some stories of professionals, and he specifically talks about people that are artsy, that are not really 9-to-5 type of people. They don't need to work a 9-to-5 job. And yet, he says, each of them had certain routines that they followed very, very carefully, extremely punctuously. They were on their routine. So he talks about Beethoven. He had his morning coffee with exactly 60 coffee beans. I guess they ground it himself. And he counted them. And he would sit in his desk and compose from dawn. He would compose music until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and then he would take his walk. But on his walk, he took paper and pencil to write down any thoughts that come to him about his composition for sheet music, for his to write it down and to record any ideas that come along the way. And then after dinner, he had his pipe with his beer, and he would go to bed exactly, or at least by 10 p.m. he was always in bed. So he had his routine. And another brilliant philosopher, Immanuel Kant, he was famous also for his routine. In fact, his neighbors knew what time it was when he stepped outside. He stepped outside every day at 3:30 for his walk. And with his gray coat and his special stick that he walked with, every day was 3:30. You could tell what time it was. It reminds me of a joke that someone is in their house. It's in the middle of the night, and their guest asks them, "What time is it?" So the guy says, "I don't know, but I'll tell you in a second." He goes and beeps his horn outside. So the neighbor screams out, "What are you beeping your horn for? It's 2:30 in the morning now." So he comes back inside. He says, "It's 2:30 a.m. He wanted to know what time it was. So he beeped his horn, woke up his neighbors. They screamed. They told him what time it is. It's just a little joke. But the idea is that everyone knew that this philosopher, that he would take his walk exactly at 3:30. And then Rabbi Sacks says there's a book that brings down all of these professionals, artists, composers, philosophers, writers, and it talks about each of them and how they, it gives examples from all of them, how they had certain routines. Most creative people have daily rituals, and these form the soil in which their seeds eventually grow, or their seeds of invention end up growing from. So that's an interesting fact, because I wouldn't necessarily think that artsy people have routines. I would think that they are based on inspiration. And when they are inspired, they could write for 5 days straight. When they're not inspired, I would think that they would take a few days off or a week off. And Rabbi Sacks is negating my assumption, and he's saying, no, they actually are all people of routine, which is surprising to me. I guess I'm not into the field of art and writing music or being a author. So I guess I shouldn't really assume anything, but it just, logic, I think, tells you, and I think that's why he's writing it. Logic says that people that are artsy are not necessarily going to have routines. In fact, you would think that they're the opposite of routine people. It's like there's the people that are 9 to 5 type of people, and there's other people that are really not. They're not limited. It doesn't mean they can't make a living. It just means they're not going to be able to work in a 9 to 5 job. And but Rabbi Sacks says, no, these are he has a source, some book called Daily Rituals, by a author, Mason Curry, and he writes about these 150 philosophers, artists, composers, and writers that they were people of routine. Okay, well, then he says that, note the paradox. These were all innovators, pioneers, groundbreakers, trailblazers, and they formulated new ideas, new forms of expression. It did things that no one before them had done quite that way. And they changed the landscape. They ventured into the unknown, but their daily lives were ritual and routine. And he says that the reason for this is that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, which obviously has some truth to it. I don't know if his exact percentages are correct, but there definitely is a lot of hard work that goes into all of these talented people. It doesn't just come from nowhere. It comes from hard work. And sometimes many long years. Being creative involves hard work. Now, would any of you like to share your thoughts about this? Creativity, art, and routine. Anyone have any thoughts on this?
I know, Matt.
Maybe you're not showing.
Yeah,
He can't see. There, somebody.
He can't see.
He can't see. You're not on the screen.
Jan,
I'm going to know that she has a
Yeah.
question.
Rachel has a question.
Sure. I'm listening.
I have a thought. First, the idea of sacrificing live bull is so unappealing. I don't know why they thought about that. And it's the first time that we didn't have any korbanot before, did we?
Yeah.
No, before they built the temple.
Can you repeat that?
So let me repeat the question. I'll repeat the question. Rachel is asking about the fact that I was mentioning the article is based on the daily sacrifices, that in the morning there was a lamb, and in the afternoon they sacrificed the lamb. And Rachel is asking, well, this is something new. Do we have it before this story in the Torah, before the tabernacle was made? Were there any sacrifices? So what we do find is that all the way from the beginning of creation, they were already bringing sacrifices. We have the story of Cain and Abel. In fact, came about because of a sacrifice. And if you look up the story, you see that Hevel brought from the Bechayrais Tzoina, from the firstborn of his sheep, and from the best. And Hashem turned to his sacrifice. So from the beginning of creation, we had sacrifices. Then we know the story of Noach. The story of Noach is after he went out of the ark, he understood that the reason he's supposed to bring 7 of every kosher animal was in order to bring a sacrifice to God. And then we have the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that they each brought sacrifices on altars as a donation and gift to God. And what was unique about the Jewish people was that we did not bring human sacrifices. We brought animal sacrifices. And in those days, they actually, among the non-Jews, they would bring human sacrifices. And one of the big things that Abraham fought against was that God doesn't want human sacrifices. But the idea of animal sacrifices, it does sound, and I don't blame you for being a little surprised that that's a major part of the temple and tabernacle. The sacrifices that were brought actually have a very deep and important meaning to them. And that is, you have to really step back and understand why God created animals. What did he create the animals for? What did he create the world for? You really have to step back and try to think, what is the purpose of this world? And why are we here? What is our goal? What is our mission? And when you start thinking about that, you realize that the entire world was really created for man. Man is the ultimate goal of creation. God created angels, but that wasn't the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is man. And he created an entire world, Bishvil Yisrael, for the Jewish people, so that we could serve Hashem. And he created man. He gave us free choice. And he wants us to choose good, choose right from wrong. And he gave us an entire world to use all the resources in order to serve God. And so we have everything here on earth that should help us and make it possible for us to serve God. And some of the part of serving God is bringing God into every aspect of creation. And one of those ideas is sacrificing. One of those important factors is bringing a sacrifice from an animal, which is supposed to give a inspiration to us, how we're supposed to give ourselves over to Hashem, just like we're bringing an animal and the animal's life is given over to God. It's supposed to be an inspiration to us to realize that our life is meant to be used for God. And what we've done with the animal is we've actually elevated the animal to now become part of Hashem. Until now, it was only a animal. It had the life element of an animal. And by sacrificing it, we are elevating it into holiness. And at the same time, the Torah does permit us to eat meat. And it's the same idea. By eating meat, we're actually elevating the animal to become part of our body, of our flesh and bones. We're making from an animal, we're making it into a human because it becomes part of us. And so we're elevating the animal. Now, we would not come up with this idea on our own, but this is how God tells us in the Torah that this is the meaning and purpose of what we're here for, is to bring these sacrifices. He commanded us to bring sacrifices, and he permitted us to slaughter meat. So it's a good question, and this is the short answer. But there is, obviously there's more to discuss. But this is in short, that would be the explanation.
I have a question. There's another
Yes.
question.
Oh, another question, Rachel? Okay.
Pretty egoistic, that the whole world is created just for humans to
to take advantage of everything that.
Nope, that's not it. It's not for us to take advantage. It's for us to do the work that God wanted to elevate everything to use for God. In other words, God wanted everything to be used for him, and he created man, and especially the Jewish people, to be the ones to fulfill that. So he created the Torah, which is the guidebook, and he created the Jewish people, and we follow the Torah, and we ultimately fulfill the mission that God wanted in this world. There was another question. Did anyone else want to ask something? No. Okay. So,
And I'll add one small. They,
Sure.
Paul referred to the artisan as Chachamei Lev, the wiser of the heart.
right.
Can you expand the term Chachamei Lev? I don't know if a sculpture is Chacham Lev. We think of philosopher as a Chacham, maybe.
Repeat the question, I can't hear.
They refer to the artisan in the Bible as the wise in the heart, the wise heart. The wise, they're supposed to be the wisest people, I suppose. And I don't know if those that paint and make sculptures, if they are the real wise people that we should listen to.
So Rachel is asking about the Chachmei Lev, that it uses that term, that they are wise of the heart. That God tells Moses, speak to all the Chachmei Lev, and that I have filled Ruach Chachma, I have filled them with a spirit of wisdom, and they should make these clothings for me. For the children of Aaron to serve, to sanctify them, and they should be kohanim for me. So why are they called Chachmei Lev? Why are they called wise in the heart? And that's a good question. It's really off topic. It's really not connected to the essay, but maybe I'll try to look up and see if the commentaries discuss that and get back to you. But I don't want to interrupt the topic. Don't want to look it up now, but I'll try to get back to you regarding that. The topic of the essay here is all about routine.
About what?
Routine.
Oh,
Routine and rituals. And Rabbi Sacks is trying to bring this idea of routine and build on it, emphasize it, and say that there's something crucial about having routine in order to serve God. Which one may say, I don't know if it's so necessary to have such routine. You may say, well, each person serves God in their way. You know, as long as they don't go against any of the laws and they keep the rules to a certain extent, you know, maybe you don't need so much routine. But Rabbi Sacks sees it as a crucial element in serving God. Now, Rabbi Sacks does have a point, because we know that if you have to pray 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and night, you're sort of stuck admitting that there must be routine in Judaism. There has to be some level of routine if if that's the obligation. You have to say the Shema twice a day. You got to pray the prayers 3 times a day. So there obviously is some element of routine that God wants from everyone, even people that are maybe not such routine type of people. So Rabbi Sacks is definitely correct in a certain sense that routine is important, but Rabbi Sacks wants to, I guess, explain it, show how crucial it is. And by doing that, he says that there is a interesting discussion among the rabbis of the Talmud. And they discuss which of the verses would you say is the most important principle of the Torah? What verse? Imagine if you knew the entire Torah, what verse would you choose as the most important principle, fundamental principle of the Torah, and a great principle of the Torah? So, which one?
No, there is the story about Hillel and Shammai. That's what we are referring to.
Okay, so it sounds to me like you would say maybe love your neighbor as yourself. Maybe that would be a good answer.
He said something else. No, Arthur said.
Yeah, well, you don't want, right. Well, it's the same idea, but he speaks in the negative. What you don't want done to yourself, don't do to others.
That's what
That's
he said.
true.
That's
But
the,
that's
that's
the
the base. That's what he said, no?
Yeah, no, you're correct. But it's the idea of love your neighbor as yourself. And you're right. One of the rabbis, there's 4 opinions. One of the rabbis says that verse out of the whole Torah. Another rabbi says that man was made in the likeness of God. That's another very important point, great principle of the Torah. Another verse that I think everyone here would probably say if they were asked this question, what's the most basic and important prayer?
Don't separate yourself from the command. What is it?
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Right? Shema. I'm sure many of you say it every day. Shema Yisrael. Right? Many of you probably say the Shema. Shema is a very basic prayer, accepting God's unity, that there's only one God, accepting God's sovereignty over us and accepting his unity. And that's what it is. God is our God. God is one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. That's the Shema prayer. And that is another view of these 4 views. And then the most surprising view of these views says that the basic principle, the greatest principle of the Torah is the verse, 1 lamb you shall bring in the morning, and 1 lamb you shall bring in the afternoon as a sacrifice. Isn't that surprising? That would be the fundamental and important, crucial verse, a basic principle, the greatest principle of the Torah is 1 lamb in the morning, 1 lamb in the afternoon. Sounds a little surprising.
Rabbi, I don't understand what you're saying. Say it again.
There are 4 opinions of what is the most important principle of the Torah. And the final view may surprise you. This may surprise you. This view says that the greatest principle of the Torah is the verse, 1 lamb you shall bring as a sacrifice in the morning, and 1 lamb you shall bring as a sacrifice in the afternoon.
Alone? No,
But isn't that antiquated?
I hear.
Sure.
So the sacrifices, although we don't bring sacrifices today, but we do eat meat. Most people I know eat meat. And eating meat is a little surprising because doesn't it show how selfish we are? That we are allowing an animal to be killed just for our own enjoyment. It's one of the most selfish things that you can imagine, that even the most morally and ethical people allow to be done. They eat meat, which encourages more animals to be killed just for their own enjoyment. And some of the most ethical and moral people not only eat meat, but they eat meat every night or almost every night. And so this is one of the areas where the question of bringing sacrifices, and is this old-fashioned or is it not? Well, we could answer it ourselves by saying, look, we eat meat, so we can't look negative at the fact that this is a commandment in the Torah as a sacrifice. So accepting that this, and when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, when the temple is going to be rebuilt, there will be animal sacrifices that will be brought. And we will understand it better than we understand today. But for those that have a hard time with understanding sacrifices, they should be able to understand it when they realize that they themselves eat meat, and they themselves wear leather clothing, and they themselves wear fur clothing, and other types of things that are used only when an animal is slaughtered. And so that, that's just, this is really a side point, but it is important to realize and understand that this is part of the, this is part of the Torah, is to bring sacrifices of animals, and of course not people, but the sacrifices are part of the Torah. And if you go through the book of Leviticus, you will find many, many laws about sacrifices there. And the discussion that we are having is not so much as to the fact that it's surprising that there would be a sacrifice, but it's surprising that that verse would be the great principle of the Torah. That's what's surprising. And not because there's something wrong with bringing a sacrifice, but more just what is it? What do we get from that? What are we learning from that? How is that such a great principle for us to take a message from? That's really what the question is. Again, we're not worried about ethics and morality, because all of us here eat meat, so we're all guilty of killing animals. So we're not going to question that. But what we are questioning is the fact that why would this be considered a great principle of the Torah, to the extent that all the other views in this debate, they all acknowledge that the final say is that this verse is the great principle of the Torah. So Rabbi Sacks is going to try to explain why this verse would be the great principle of the Torah when you have other very great principle, seemingly greater principles in other verses. And this verse does not seem to be the greatest principle. And obviously what Rabbi Sacks is going to build on is what he discussed earlier, the idea of routine. And so Rabbi Sacks says this verse is the source of course, of the prayers, because we have prayers that are corresponding to these sacrifices, the daily sacrifice. And the idea that Rabbi Sacks brings out from this is that all the other views talk about some type of an inspiration that one gets. You're inspired, you're thinking about God and how we are in the likeness of God, or you're thinking about God and accepting God's sovereignty on you and how God is one. These are inspirational thoughts that come about. They come to us every so often, thinking of how you could help your neighbor. These are great mitzvahs and part of the fabric of what Judaism is all about, but they have to do with some type of an inspiration. And this law that talks about bringing the sacrifice is a law about action, daily action, twice daily. This is a very it's an action that's maybe different than the feeling of love towards your neighbor, the feeling of accepting God's unity, accepting God's or sovereignty over us, and it's different than the feeling of how we are created in the image of God. It's a practical action that we are told to do in a routine way, in a very routine way. It's a discipline of daily discipline of how we have to do things. So Rabbi Sacks uses he says a sentence like this: we can all recall moments of insight when we had a great idea, a transformative thought, the glimpse of a project that could change our lives, but a day later or a week later or a year later, they somehow become forgotten. That's the idea that's what inspiration is. Things that are inspiring, they last for some time, and then they become stale. They become stale. And here, Rabbi Sacks says we have something different. The people who change the world, they actually have daily routines. They know that details are important, and they know that discipline of hard work is very important, and it's built over time. And the greatness of Judaism is that we take these high ideals and we turn them into our daily routines. And that is that we give discipline to our lives, changing the way we feel, think, and act. So what Rabbi Sacks says is that we take the idea of doing a favor for someone, of thinking about God, we are made in God's likeness, thinking about how God is sovereign over us. We take these ideas and try to connect them with something practical on a daily, in more than daily, twice daily routine. And what happens is that we bring these spiritual ideas or the theology, and we bring it into our daily lives. This is how we build on our routines. We're able to not only keep to our regular routines, but we bring these inspirational ideas and we make them into daily routines. It actually allows us to be more inspired. It allows us to be more into the spiritual and the spiritual rituals that we're meant to be involved in. By connecting them with a daily routine, it actually makes them more successful. It brings them into our daily life. And I think the point that Rabbi Sacks is bringing out, I mean, it's a interesting concept that action actually does have an influence on your internal self. By doing things again and again, it actually somehow clicks. It gets you more into it. And what Rabbi Sacks wants to explain with this, not only explaining this surprising debate that the rabbis had, because this is a very, it's a very insightful explanation of this debate, but it actually has a practical side to it. And that practical side to it explains, I think, a question that many people have. And that is that how do you pray every single day the same prayers? You see, in Judaism, our prayers are basically the same on a daily basis. We have a few changes for Shabbat, we add a few things, but basically everything is the same. How do you handle that? How does one explain that? Why is that? Why should it be so? And the point that Rabbi Sacks brings out actually explains this. And it explains that the idea is that if you have something that you do on a daily routine, what it will ultimately do will be that it will actually have an impact on your inner self. And it will impact you, it'll affect you that much more than just something you read that goes in one ear and comes out the other, or you read it and you might remember it for a while. I'll give you an example. Imagine, we live in a very sophisticated and technical, very technically savvy generation. There's going to be a time there might be a time where they could create a small, tiny type of a chip, small chip, that will have all the information about science, mathematics, and even Torah. And they will offer people to put it into your brain and attach it to you. And then you will be a brilliant scientist. Now imagine they offer this. And you become a great, you have all this scholarly knowledge now. And let's say even Torah knowledge. You have it now, it's attached to your brain. Do you think that this is going to impact the way you do things? And my answer to you is probably not very much. And the reason it's not going to impact the way you do things is because it didn't really internalize with you. It's like you have all the books there and you can read from them, but it doesn't become part and parcel of who you are. You're not living it. You just happen to have all that knowledge there, but it's not you. It's like an additional entity inside you, even inside your brain, but it's not the real you. When you do something on a regular basis, on a routine basis, and you repeat it continuously, this will actually become you. It'll internalize, it'll connect to you. Of course, you have to think about it a little. You can't just read something and expect yourself to change. But if you really internalize the messages of the prayers, of the daily prayers, and you think about them, they will become you, become part of you. It'll be second nature that they are you, not the second nature to be able to say them by heart, but it'll become part of your emotional self, your intellectual self. It's not like a chip that someone's putting into your brain. It's not like information that goes into your ear and it might stay, might leave, but it's just information that you know. It actually becomes part of who you are by doing things on a regular basis. And when that idea is, where Rabbi Sacks is saying, it actually has an impact on everything about Judaism, it will ultimately internalize with you. If you have your daily routine allows everything else to, your daily routine of Judaism allows all the mystical and spiritual ideas of Judaism to internalize with you. And that's the idea of this statement, that the one sacrifice you bring in the morning and the one sacrifice you bring in the afternoon, again, it's one sheep, one lamb in the morning, one lamb in the afternoon for the entire Jewish people. But that idea of routine, which we now do as our prayers, and we say the same prayers every day almost, that idea is that it internalizes everything about Judaism into us. All the spiritual ideas that we once in a have are inspired, once in a while we get inspired from, they are able to internalize and become part and parcel of who we are. And that's what Judaism is all about. That it's not that we're acting like a Jew. It's not that we do things like a Jew does, but the actions come from our soul. That's who we are. It's not what we do, but it's who we are. And that's a huge, huge difference. A person could act like a Jew. It doesn't make them a Jew.
Rituals, Rabbi, it's Esther. Don't rituals for centuries, that's kept our tradition going.
They did keep our tradition going. And that's also true. What Esther is saying is an alternative importance, explanation of the importance of our prayers, of not changing anything. It actually keeps the tradition the way it is, unadulterated, unaltered, undiluted. And this way, it actually is a powerful message for the future generations that we have the real McCoy, it's genuine. And that is also true. But I think Rabbi Sacks is adding another dimension to that, and that is that it actually, we're able to internalize it by doing things on a regular basis. We internalize not only what we're reading, but the ideas behind it. And the idea of loving your neighbor, the idea of accepting God's sovereignty. I mean, that's part of the prayers. But by doing the prayers, we bring it into us and we connect with it, and we're able to internalize it to become part of who we are rather than just acting that way twice a day. It actually becomes part of our soul, part of our essence, part of our internal self. And Rabbi Sacks concludes this with a few points. He says, number one, he says that much of Judaism does seem boring and repetitive, obsessed with details and bereft for the most part of drama or inspiration. He says, but yet that is precisely what writing the novel, composing the symphony, directing the film, in building a billion-dollar business, that's what it is. Most of the time, it's boring. Most of the time, it might be doing repetitive, but that is how you come to the inspiration. It is a matter of hard work, focused attention, daily rituals, and that's where all sustainable greatness comes from. So, it's an interesting fact that in order to have the inspiration of being able to write new music, you need to have that daily routine of being at your desk for 10 hours or however many hours he was there. The musicians sit at their desk, the composers, however many hours, but it takes that hard work to ultimately get that inspiration. And the inspiration is built on that hard work and all that repetitive work. That's how it's built. But Rabbi Sacks is connecting that to Judaism, and he's saying that there are rituals and they are repetitive. And the idea behind it is that it actually will bring inspiration if you stick to it. If you continue the ritual, you will find the inspiration there. Not only that, but it actually will internalize. It'll become part of who you are. And then Rabbi Sacks brings that in the West, we have a understanding about a religious experience that when you're miraculously saved from danger, that's the real, spiritual moment. And you climb this huge mountain these are the moments that are the awe they are awe-inspiring moments. And that's how we seem to think holiness is. But they are just experiences, and they linger in the memory. They are not part of everyday life, and they're not woven into the texture of our character. And in order for that to happen, Judaism is about changing us so that we become these creative artists whose greatest creation is our own life. And in order to reach that level, he's speaking poetically, of course, figuratively, but in order to reach that level where we accomplish, where we are creative artists, meaning we're understanding God and connecting to God and doing these great deeds. In order to do that, we need to have the daily rituals, and that will allow the holiness to set in.
Can I have a question?
The rabbi is inspired.
What is your question?
Yeah, in a practical way, where do I get all these lamps and what are they do? Where you take it? What is happening? Every day everybody brings a lamp. Where do I bring it and what are they going to do with it?
There's one lamb that the entire Jewish people bring.
Oh, not
Oh,
everybody.
no.
No, it's one for the whole world.
I see.
But I have some thought, Rabbi.
Let me just finish. Let me just finish the final statement over here. So he says that there's something called a PET and a MRI that are scans, and they scan the brain, and they have found that spiritual exercise reconfigures the brain, and it gives some type of inner resilience. We become more grateful, and we have more trust in God. So it really shapes our identity, these rituals. So this is the idea here, that doing the rituals does have an impact on the physical self. And if you seek sudden inspiration, Rabbi Sacks says, then work at it every day for a year or a lifetime, and that's how you'll get the inspiration. You got to keep working at it and do the same thing every day. And you will ultimately, the more you seek spiritual heights, the more you need the ritual and the routine of Jewish law of following the daily rituals. And the last thing I want to mention is a surprising story, that there was a group of antagonists that didn't like the Hasidic movement. And so they came to the leader of the Hasidic movement, one of the leaders, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, about 250 years ago. And they came to him and said, your Hasidim, your followers, they're not as pious as they make themselves to be. They make themselves out to be more pious than they really are. So the Alter Rebbe, he thought for a moment, and then he said, you know what, if that's true, then may the curse of the Mishnah affect them. Now, the antagonists were like very shocked. It sounded like the Alter Rebbe, it sounded like this great rabbi was cursing his followers, that some curse of the Mishnaic literature would somehow affect them. So it sounded like he was speaking negative about them. And the antagonists were a little shocked. So he said, well, let me explain. He said, there's a Mishnah that says that anyone who acts lame or blind, but they're really not, but they just act, they pretend to be lame or blind, it says they will not die of old age before they actually become lame or blind. So the Alter Rebbe was saying that if someone acts pious and spiritual, ultimately that will affect them. They will ultimately become that way. They will become pious. So it's not so bad. Even if you give more charity than you really should be giving, you'll ultimately become even more charitable. You'll ultimately become that way. If you pray longer than you really are in the league of praying, you will ultimately reach a level where you could pray long, where you'll feel you'll be on the level to pray longer. So even doing rituals that your body, yourself, your feeling is not fully there, it'll ultimately, you will reach that level that you will become that way. It'll become part of you. You will reach a level where you will be comfortable and you will fit right in. But it takes time. You got to put time into it. And that's what Rabbi Sacks is saying. This whole article is it's all about routine. And yes, Rachel,